The night was too quiet for a mansion that never slept. Richard Halloran stood by the window of his study, the amber glow of his whiskey swirling in the glass, when he saw a shadow move near the rose garden below. It wasn't unusual to see staff finishing late, but something about the silhouette stopped him cold. The figure wasn't alone. His daughter, Emily. Her white dress glimmered faintly under the garden lights, and standing too close to her, whispering, was a young man in a worn jacket. Richard's pulse quickened. The boy's hand brushed hers, and she didn't pull away. For a man who built empires by predicting markets, he suddenly felt blind, powerless. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. The boy, Noah, the gardener's son. The realization hit like a slap. Richard had seen the kid before, trimming hedges, quiet, polite, invisible. But not now. Now he was standing where no one was allowed, in the sacred space of the Halloran bloodline. Anger rose in Richard's chest, sharp and metallic. He'd raised Emily to be untouchable, to move through life like one of his assets, flawless, protected, distant from risk. But here she was, risking everything under his own window. He stepped back, the floor creaking beneath his shoes. Emily looked up suddenly, as if sensing eyes on her. Richard froze behind the curtain, his breath shallow. For a brief second, her gaze seemed to pierce the glass, unafraid, almost daring him to act. Then she turned back to Noah, handed him something, a folded piece of paper, and disappeared into the darkness of the hedge maze. Richard's hand trembled slightly as he placed the whiskey on the desk. He had built his world on contracts, documents that defined truth, ownership, power. Yet this one, exchanged in secrecy, felt like an omen. Minutes later, he was outside, walking briskly across the marble terrace. The air smelled of wet soil and roses, heavy and sweet. He could hear Noah's footsteps fading into the servants' path. Richard stopped where they had stood. There, half buried in the dirt, was a torn corner of paper, Emily's handwriting visible under the garden light. Just one word was legible. Agreement. His heartbeat thundered. What could she possibly be agreeing to? And with him? That night, Richard didn't sleep. The house felt different, alive, whispering secrets through the hallways. Every clock tick sounded like a countdown. By morning, he had already decided. He would summon Emily to his office before lunch. No accusations, no outbursts, just questions. Strategic ones. The kind that could destroy or protect. He had no idea that by the end of the next day it wouldn't be his daughter under interrogation. It would be his conscience. The sun hadn't yet burned off the morning fog when Emily stepped into her father's office. The air was sharp with the smell of oak polish and control, the kind of room where words weighed more than people. Richard Halloran sat behind his massive desk, fingers steepled, eyes steady, as if he'd already calculated every possible outcome. "Sit down," he said quietly. Emily obeyed, though her chin remained lifted. She looked nothing like the little girl who once hid under that same desk to surprise him on his birthdays. Now she was 23, poised, calm, untouchable in a way that unnerved him. Richard studied her. "You were in the garden last night." Her lips curved slightly, not into a smile, but something close to it. "You've always said the property is ours to enjoy. With the gardener's son?" The words came out colder than he intended, each syllable a fracture in the air. "Do you have any idea how that looks?" "Yes," she said simply. "Like someone you can't control." Silence thickened between them. Richard leaned forward. "What did you give him?" Emily hesitated, then reached into her bag and placed a folded document on the table. "This," she said. "But it's not his. It's yours." He stared at the paper, wary, as if it might explode. "What is it?" "A contract," she said softly. "One that belongs to Halloran Industries. You signed it, or should have." He frowned. "I sign hundreds of contracts." "What are you talking about?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she studied his face. The man who had built skyscrapers, crushed rivals, and turned human trust into profit. Then she said, "It's an agreement your father made, with Noah's father." before you inherited the company. Richard's pulse quickened. That's impossible. Emily slid the paper closer, just enough for him to see the faded letterhead, Halloran Manufacturing, 1989. His father's signature gleamed faintly at the bottom. But next to it a blank line, co-signature pending, Richard Halloran. He looked up. Where did you get this? Noah found it, buried in his father's old workshop. His family was promised a share of the company, equity. Your signature was never added. That's why they lost everything. Richard's chest tightened. This is absurd. That man was paid generously. He was ruined, Emily said, voice trembling for the first time. Because you never honored the deal. The accusation cut through him like glass. Richard's instinct was to dismiss, deny, deflect, the tactics that had saved him 1,000 times. But something in her eyes stopped him. Not anger, not fear, conviction. Emily, he said, choosing his words carefully. You don't understand the complexity of... I understand perfectly. She stood up, her voice gaining strength. You built your empire on broken promises. I found one of them. Richard rose too, his chair scraping the floor. You're being manipulated. Maybe, she said, pausing at the door. But maybe I'm just finally seeing you clearly. The door closed softly behind her. For a long time, Richard stood motionless, staring at the unsigned line on that ancient contract. The ink had faded but the silence around it felt loud, accusing. He picked up the paper, his reflection trembling in the glass frame behind his desk. He had buried this past once. Now, his own daughter had unearthed it. And somewhere beyond those walls, the gardener's son was waiting, holding the other half of the truth. Richard Halloran had always believed that control was the same as safety. But now, control was slipping, and safety felt like a myth. He sat in his car outside the archives of Halloran Industries, the morning sun slicing through the glass like interrogation lights. The air was thick with the hum of memory. This was where everything he had built began. Somewhere inside those steel drawers under layers of dust and deception was proof of what Emily claimed. He didn't tell his secretary he was coming. He wanted silence. He wanted truth. On his terms. Inside, the building smelled of paper and cold metal. He walked past forgotten contracts, old blueprints, the ghosts of his father's empire. The clerk looked up nervously. Mr. Halloran, you don't usually... I need access to the Halloran manufacturing records. Year 1989. Those are sealed, sir. Unseal them. Minutes later, Richard stood over a gray box marked Confidential. His hands, usually steady as stone, trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside were faded ledgers, brittle letters, and finally, a folder with the same name that haunted him since Emily's revelation. Noah Keller Sr. He flipped through the pages, each one another nail in the coffin of denial. Patent diagrams. Letters of intent. A draft contract promising Keller 20% equity in Halloran Manufacturing for his design of a revolutionary irrigation system, the invention that made their first fortune. Then, one note in his father's handwriting. R, to finalize payment and equity confirmation. Delay until patent transfer complete. Richard's stomach turned. Delay. Not cancel. Delay. But the transfer had gone through, and the equity had vanished. Keller's name was erased from every official document. He remembered Keller vaguely, a man with oil-stained hands and bright ideas, always humble, always loyal. Richard had been young then, hungry, desperate to prove himself. When Keller died, he never questioned the story. Accident, bad investments, unfortunate timing. But now, reading those pages, Richard saw it for what it was. A theft disguised as business. His family's wealth had roots in someone else's ruin. He closed the folder slowly. The air felt thinner now, suffocating. For the first time in years, guilt, real unfiltered guilt, pressed against his ribs. His phone buzzed. A message from James, his longtime advisor. You might want to see this, Richard. Someone's talking to the press. Attached was a blurry photo. Emily, leaving a small cafe downtown. Beside her, Noah. Richard's jaw tightened. "Damn it," he muttered. The walls were closing in. He rushed out of the archives, the folder clutched under his arm. The city's noise hit him like static. Sirens, horns, the dull roar of a world he could no longer command. In the reflection of a passing car, he saw himself, the great Richard Halloran, reduced to a man chasing ghosts. As he got into his car, one thought burned through the haze. If Noah and Emily exposed this, Halloran Industries wouldn't just lose investors, it would lose its soul. But what Richard didn't know was that someone else already had copies of those same documents. Someone inside his company, and they weren't loyal to him and or to Emily. For 48 hours, Emily vanished. Her phone went dark. Her apartment sat cold and untouched. Even her closest friends hadn't heard from her. For Richard Halloran, those hours stretched like an endless night, one where every tick of the clock echoed with the question he refused to ask out loud. Had he pushed her too far? He sat alone in the grand dining room, where chandeliers once glittered above laughter and business deals. Now only silence filled the air. The servants moved carefully, afraid to disturb the storm brewing behind his eyes. On the third evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, Richard heard the front gates open. Two figures approached the house, hand in hand, Emily and Noah. She walked as if she owned the place, no trace of apology in her steps. Noah, dressed simply but standing tall, carried something under his arm, a leather folder, the same kind Richard had used to close million-dollar deals. Richard didn't move. He just stared as they entered. "Where have you been?" His voice was low, deliberate. Emily's answer was calm. "Finding what you tried to bury." She placed the folder on the table. Noah opened it and slid a document toward Richard. Another contract, freshly printed yet echoing the one from decades ago. "This," Noah said carefully, "is the agreement your father promised mine. Only this time, it's updated. Fair, legal, binding." Richard blinked. "You expect me to make it right," Emily interrupted. "Not for him. For yourself." The young man's gaze was steady. There was no arrogance, no hatred, only resolve. "We're not here to destroy you," Noah said. "We're here to give you a chance to prove that you're better than the man who started this." For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the soft tick of the grandfather clock. Time, relentless and cruel. Richard's mind raced. His empire was bleeding from rumors. His advisors were whispering. And now the gardener's son was offering terms. He wanted to laugh. But when he looked at Emily, her calm, unflinching eyes, he couldn't. She wasn't rebelling. She was leading. He exhaled slowly. "You think this little deal can undo what's been done?" "No," Emily said. "But it can stop what's coming." Richard leaned back, studying them. There was power in their simplicity, the quiet kind that came from truth. For the first time in decades, he felt small in his own home. Then he noticed something strange. At the bottom of the document, under the new signatures, there was an additional clause, one he hadn't expected. It granted joint decision-making rights to a board of trustees, including Noah, Emily, and one other person. "Who's this?" he asked, tapping the third name. Emily hesitated. "You'll find out soon enough." Before he could press further, Noah reached for her hand. "We'll give you until tomorrow to decide," he said. "After that, this goes public." They turned and walked out, calm, confident, unstoppable. Richard stood there, the paper burning in his hands. His empire felt like glass, shining, fragile, ready to shatter. But his attention was fixed on that third name, a familiar signature, one he'd seen 1,000 times on contracts, memos, and internal reports. James Whitaker, his most trusted advisor. And suddenly Richard realized this wasn't just a family reckoning, it was a setup. Richard Halloran didn't sleep that night. He sat alone in his office, staring at the document Emily and Noah had left behind. The new contract, the ultimatum, the proof of betrayal. The ink was fresh, but the name at the bottom, James Whitaker, haunted him like an echo from the past. James had been by his side for 25 years, He was there through every merger, every scandal, every time Richard needed someone to clean up the mess before it reached the press. Loyal, efficient, invisible. Until now. The door creaked open. James entered quietly, his expression unreadable. "You wanted to see me." Richard didn't look up. "Sit." James obeyed, crossing his legs with the calmness of a man used to power. Richard slid the document across the desk. "Explain." James studied it, eyes scanning the pages without flinching. "I see Emily's been busy." "Busy?" Richard's voice sharpened. "She's threatening to dismantle everything I built. And somehow, your name's on it." James leaned back. "Because I helped her." The words landed like a blow. Richard froze. "You what?" "I helped her," James repeated. "I gave her the records, the Keller contract, the archives you thought were sealed. You were never going to face it, Richard. Someone had to make you." Richard rose from his chair, fury shaking through him. "You betrayed me." "No," James said evenly. "I liberated you from a lie." Their eyes locked. For the first time, the two men who had built an empire together stood on opposite sides of the same truth. Richard's voice dropped to a whisper. "You think this act of treachery makes you righteous?" "I think it makes me human," James replied. "And you should try it sometime." For a long moment, there was silence. Only the faint hum of the city beyond the windows. Then Richard spoke, quieter, darker. "You've always envied me. The power. The name. Admit it." James smiled faintly. "I didn't envy what you had, Richard. I pitied what you lost." Richard's fist slammed against the desk, rattling the crystal decanter. "Get out." But James didn't move. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope. "Before you destroy yourself completely, you should see this." Richard hesitated, then tore it open. Inside were photocopies of older documents, sealed settlements, rewritten clauses, erased signatures, all trails leading back to the same betrayal. The Keller Agreement, rewritten under Richard's name, buried by company lawyers decades ago. His hands trembled as he flipped through them. How did you get these?" James met his eyes. "Emily isn't your enemy. She's your mirror. She just chose to tell the truth first." The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in. Richard sank into his chair, every breath heavier than the last. His empire, built on numbers and leverage, was collapsing under the weight of conscience. But James wasn't done. "There's one more thing," he said, standing. "Tomorrow a reporter is going to call. She has copies of everything. I suggest you find your daughter before she finds you." Richard looked up, rage and disbelief fighting in his eyes. "You leaked it?" "No," James said softly. "Emily did." Then he walked out, leaving Richard alone with the truth, and the faint sound of thunder rolling in the distance. Outside, the storm was gathering. Inside, Richard Halloran finally understood that this wasn't just about a contract. It was about everything he had taken, and everyone who had stopped believing he deserved to keep it. And as lightning flashed across the city skyline, one thought burned in his mind. If Emily had started this war, he was going to finish it. By dawn, the Halloran estate was silent, the kind of silence that follows explosions. The storm had passed, but inside, the real one was just beginning. Richard sat in the boardroom of Halloran Industries, staring at a dozen faces that no longer looked loyal. Every one of them had seen the headlines that morning. Every one of them knew. Halloran family tied to stolen patent scandal. Heiress exposes decades of fraud. The leak had spread like wildfire. Every outlet had a version of the story, and each one made Richard look like the villain of his own empire. The Keller contract, the missing signatures, the betrayal, all of it laid bare. James was gone. Emily wasn't answering, and the company's stock was falling faster than he could breathe. He looked around the table at men and women he had handpicked. Lawyers, investors, executives. They avoided his eyes now. Power, he realized, was only ever borrowed, never owned. "Damage control," Richard said finally. His voice was low, controlled, the same tone he'd used to intimidate senators and CEOs alike. We'll issue a statement. There's nothing left to control, said one of the board members, interrupting him. The documents are verified. The SEC is already calling. Richard's knuckles whitened on the table. We deny everything. Another voice. Sir, with respect, your daughter was the source. She's scheduled to speak publicly at noon. The air left the room. For the first time, Richard's mind went blank. He stood up slowly, the weight of every choice pressing down on his shoulders. Meeting adjourned, he muttered. But no one moved. No one followed him. Outside the conference room, he could feel eyes on him. Employees whispering. Assistants pausing mid-step. The mighty Richard Halloran, untouchable titan, had become a ghost in his own empire. He got into his car without speaking to anyone and drove aimlessly through the city. Every billboard, every shining window reflected pieces of his empire, the Halloran logo still glittering above buildings built on lies. He pulled over at the edge of the river, where the skyline shimmered against gray water. It looked beautiful from a distance, it always had. But up close he could see the cracks, the stains, the decay beneath the shine. Just like him. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered, voice hoarse. Halloran. Mr. Halloran, said a woman's voice. This is Claire Monroe with the Financial Standard. I'd like to confirm a few details before your daughter's statement. He said nothing. Sources say, she continued, that you've been aware of the Keller agreement for years, that you personally ordered its destruction. Can you comment? Richard ended the call. His pulse hammered. He stared at the phone for a long time before whispering, she wouldn't, but she would. Emily had inherited his strength and turned it against him. As he sat there, the clouds broke, sunlight cutting through the glass like judgment. His reflection looked older now, not the lion of industry, but the man behind the mask. And beneath the anger, there was something else rising. Fear. He had built walls his entire life, around his fortune, his name, his heart. But Emily had found the cracks, and now the entire structure was trembling. Then his phone buzzed again. A message. From an unknown number. You want the truth before it destroys you. Meet me where it all began. Attached was a photo, the old greenhouse behind the mansion, the place where Emily and Noah first met. Richard's hands clenched around the phone. The text wasn't signed, but he didn't need to guess who sent it. It wasn't Emily. It wasn't James. It was Noah. And for the first time, Richard felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in decades. Not anger, not pride. Fear of the truth itself. The old greenhouse stood at the edge of the Halloran estate, hidden behind a tangle of vines and broken glass. Once, it had been a place of life. Orchids, roses, the pride of Richard's late wife. Now it was a skeleton of its former self, its air thick with dust and memory. Richard pushed the rusted door open. The hinges screamed. Inside, the light was fractured, thin beams cutting through cracks in the roof. Noah was already there. He stood near the center, arms crossed, a man who carried both defiance and sorrow in equal measure. You came, he said quietly. Richard didn't answer. He was studying him, the gardener's son, the intruder who had managed to turn his world upside down. But there was something else in Noah's eyes, something steady, almost noble. You said you had the truth, Richard said at last. Say it. Noah nodded slowly, pulling a small flash drive from his pocket. Everything you need to see is on this. Records, messages, wire transfers, proof that your advisor, James Whitaker, leaked the Keller documents, but not for justice. Richard frowned. What are you talking about? Noah took a step closer. James never cared about right or wrong. He wanted Halloran Industries for himself. He used Emily, used me. He fed us both just enough truth to start a war, one that would leave you destroyed and him in control. Richard's chest tightened. That's absurd. James would never. But the words died in his throat. He remembered the ease with which James had confessed, the calmness in his eyes, the warning about the reporter. It hadn't felt like regret. It had felt like calculation. Noah placed the flash drive in Richard's hand. Check it, Emails, payments to reporters, offshore accounts in his name, you'll see. The silence between them felt alive. Richard turned the drive over in his fingers, a faint tremor running through him. Why are you giving me this? Because Emily still believes he's on her side, Noah said. And if she keeps trusting him, he'll destroy her too. Richard's mind spun. For weeks, he'd been drowning in guilt, anger, loss. Now, beneath it all, a spark of something darker flickered. Vengeance. What do you want from me? He asked. Noah hesitated. Help me protect her. Help me end this before it goes any further. Richard studied him. The son of the man his family had betrayed now asking him for alliance. The irony wasn't lost on him. You really love her, he said softly. Noah met his gaze. Enough to fight for her, even if it means standing with you. For a brief, fragile second, something shifted. Two men bound by the same woman, the same guilt, the same ghosts. Then, from outside, the sound of tires screeching shattered the stillness. Richard turned sharply. Through the cracked glass, he saw a figure approaching, tall, composed, a silhouette he knew too well. James Whitaker. He entered the greenhouse slowly, his tone cool and precise. I see you two finally met without intermediaries. Richard's jaw clenched. You've been manipulating all of us. James smiled faintly. Manipulation is such an ugly word, Richard. I prefer strategy. Noah stepped forward. You're finished, James. We have proof. Do you? James asked, his smile widening. You think I'd leave real evidence on that drive? That's bait. Richard froze. What? While you were busy chasing each other's ghosts, James continued, I consolidated control of Halloran Industries. The board just voted. The company's mine. It felt like the ground disappeared beneath Richard's feet. His empire, stolen from him by the man he trusted most. James adjusted his cufflinks, perfectly calm. Congratulations, Richard. You've officially become what you always feared. Irrelevant. Then, with a final glance at Emily's photograph still lying on Richard's phone, he added, Tell your daughter I'll see her at the shareholders' meeting tomorrow. He walked out into the fading light, his shadow long against the broken glass. Noah turned to Richard. What now? Richard stared at the flash drive in his hand, jaw tightening. Now, he said, we stop playing defense. For the first time, their fight was no longer against each other, but against the man who had played them both. And somewhere in the distance, Emily Halloran was walking straight into the trap James had set for her. The next morning broke with a deceptive calm, pale sunlight spilling over the Halloran estate, as if the world itself didn't know what was about to surface. Emily sat in her old bedroom, surrounded by open boxes of her late mother's things. The house smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. She had come home only to find answers, but what she was about to uncover would rewrite everything she believed about her family and about Noah. She opened a worn folder marked Personal, Halloran Manufacturing, 1989. Inside were letters, handwritten by her grandfather, William Halloran, the founder. The ink was fading, but the words cut clean through the years. Keller's design is revolutionary. If we can secure the patent under our name before he finalizes the paperwork, we'll control the market. No need for equity. A one-time payment will suffice. Emily froze. It wasn't just Richard. It had started with his father, her grandfather, the man everyone called a genius, the patriarch whose portrait still hung in the main hall. He hadn't just betrayed Noah's father. He had orchestrated it. Her hands trembled as she found a second letter, dated 2 months later. Richard refuses to sign the payment release. Keller's threatening legal action. Handle it quietly. He's got a family. Leverage that if needed. Tears welled in her eyes. Noah's father had been silenced, not ruined by business misfortune, but crushed deliberately by the Halloran name. A soft knock at the door broke her trance. It was Noah. He stepped inside slowly, eyes moving from the boxes to the letters in her lap. You found them, he said quietly. Emily couldn't speak at first. She just looked at him, at the man whose family had suffered for her own success. My grandfather did this, she finally whispered. He stole your father's life. Noah nodded. I know. Her head lifted sharply. You knew? He sighed. Not everything. But my mother told me pieces before she died. She said he was betrayed by the Hallorans, that he never stopped working on that irrigation system, even after losing everything. He died believing he could fix it. I didn't know it was this deliberate. Emily's voice broke. All this time I thought you were angry at my father, but it was both of them. Noah knelt beside her. It doesn't matter anymore. We can end it. She looked at him, searching his face. How? He reached into his jacket and pulled out an old key, tarnished, but still gleaming faintly. This was my father's. It opens a storage unit outside the city. Inside are the original blueprints, the prototypes, proof that the invention was his. If we can show that, it won't just clear his name. It will prove that your family built their empire on his work. Emily took the key, her breath shallow. If we release that, it'll destroy everything. Noah met her eyes. Then let it burn. For a long moment, silence filled the room. Not angry, not bitter, just unbearably heavy. Emily's heart pounded. She wanted justice. But she also wanted peace. For him, for her, for the memory of her mother who had spent her life trying to hold this fractured family together. Finally, she said, We'll go tonight. But outside, unseen through the half-closed door, someone was listening, phone pressed to his ear, eyes cold. James Whitaker. He slipped away silently down the hall, whispering into the receiver. They found the blueprints. It's worse than we thought. Destroy them before they make it public. That night, as Emily and Noah prepared to uncover the last piece of the past, they had no idea they were walking into the jaws of a plan designed to erase them both. The truth had survived decades of silence, but the people who buried it once were ready to bury again. The night swallowed the outskirts of the city. Emily drove in silence, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Noah sat beside her, the old key glinting faintly in his palm. They didn't speak. Words had become too fragile, too dangerous. Outside the windshield, the rain began, thin needling drops that blurred the lights and turned the road into a mirror of shifting ghosts. Storage Unit 47, Noah said quietly. Left after the next intersection. Emily nodded. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat. It wasn't just fear. It was the weight of generations pressing down. Her grandfather's deception, her father's silence, her own choice to expose them. When they arrived, the air smelled of rust and damp earth. The rows of storage units stretched into the dark like a forgotten graveyard. Noah inserted the key into the lock. It clicked open, slow and heavy. Inside, the space was small, filled with dust-coated boxes, rolled blueprints, and the faint scent of engine oil. He clicked on a flashlight. The beam fell on a workbench covered in old tools, notebooks, and a single metal case with the name Keller scratched across it. This is it, Noah whispered. Emily knelt beside him as he opened it. Inside were diagrams, pages of mathematical precision, hydraulic sketches, and patents signed by Noah Keller Sr. She flipped through them, her pulse racing. Each page was a nail in the coffin of the Halloran legacy. Then, at the bottom of the box, she found something unexpected. A letter, folded, yellowed, addressed to Richard Halloran. She opened it carefully. The handwriting was weak, desperate. Richard, I can't keep fighting you, you've won. But please, my son has nothing to do with this. Don't punish him for my mistakes. Let him have a life. Please. Noah Keller, Sr. Emily's hand shook as she read it aloud. Noah stared at the words, jaw tight. He begged your father for mercy, he said, and your father ignored him. Emily's eyes filled with tears. No. Maybe he never saw it, maybe. But before she could finish, the faint rumble of tires broke through the rain. Headlights swept across the unit walls. Someone else was here. Noah grabbed her arm. Get down. They ducked behind a stack of crates as two men in dark suits stepped out of a black SUV, flashlights cutting through the mist. One of them held a crowbar. The other spoke into a radio. Unit 47. We're in. James Whitaker's voice crackled faintly from the other end. Destroy everything. No witnesses. Noah's pulse thundered. "They're going to burn it," he whispered. Emily looked around desperately. There was no exit except the one they came through. She spotted an old skylight above the workbench. "Climb," she whispered. They scrambled up as the men forced open the door. One stepped inside, sweeping the light across the room, landing briefly on the metal case. "Here it is." Noah reached the skylight and pushed it open. Rain poured in. He helped Emily climb through, then pulled himself up just as the first man poured gasoline over the blueprints. Below them, the flick of a lighter. Flames leapt, hungry and fast. The smoke rose in choking waves as they dropped down the far side, landing hard on the wet gravel. Emily coughed, clutching the letter against her chest. Behind them, the storage unit roared with fire, the truth turning to ash. They ran into the rain until the fire was only a faint orange glow in the distance. Finally, Noah stopped, panting. "It's gone. Everything." Emily shook her head. "Not everything." She held up the soaked, half-burned letter. "We still have this." Noah stared at her, realization dawning. "You're going to testify, aren't you?" She nodded slowly. "Tomorrow, at the shareholders' meeting. James thinks he's won, but he doesn't know what my father's about to do." Noah frowned. "Your father?" Emily's eyes hardened. "He called me an hour ago. Said he's ready to tell the truth. All of it." Thunder rolled across the city, shaking the ground beneath them. The storm that had been brewing for decades was finally breaking, and by morning it would wash everything clean or destroy what was left. The morning of the shareholders' meeting was cold and gray, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Outside Halloran Tower, reporters swarmed like vultures, cameras flashing, questions flying. Inside, the air was electric, a blend of fear, curiosity, and quiet satisfaction. Everyone had come to watch the empire fall. Emily walked through the marble lobby with calm steps, her hair damp from the rain. Beside her, Noah kept his head down. In her hand, she carried the last surviving evidence, her grandfather's letter, sealed in a plastic sleeve. The words inside were smeared but still legible, still damning. At the top floor, the boardroom waited like a courtroom. Rows of executives, investors, and lawyers faced the long table where Richard Halloran sat alone. His posture was straight, his face pale but resolute. He looked like a man about to confess to his own execution. James Whittaker stood near the podium, confident as ever, his tie perfectly knotted. "Before we begin," he said smoothly, "I'd like to clarify the agenda. As acting CEO—" "You're not the CEO," Richard interrupted, his voice steady but edged with steel. The room froze. He rose slowly, his gaze fixed on James. "Not yet, anyway. You were right about one thing, James. Power is borrowed. But today I'm returning what was never mine." James's smirk faltered slightly. "What are you doing, Richard?" Richard turned toward the room. "My father stole this company's foundation from a man named Noah Keller. My daughter exposed it, and my advisor, the man I trusted most, turned that truth into a weapon for himself." A murmur rippled across the table. Cameras clicked. The press behind the glass wall leaned forward. Richard continued, voice rising. "I have come to set the record straight. Halloran Industries was built on theft, and today I give it back." He lifted a folder from the table and slid it toward Emily. Inside was a freshly drafted deed. Effective immediately, 30% of Halloran Industries is being transferred to the Keller Foundation to fund environmental and agricultural innovation under Emily Halloran and Noah Keller's leadership. Gasps filled the room. James stepped forward, color draining from his face. "You can't do that. The board doesn't decide what's right," Richard said. "I do, at least one last time." James's voice turned venomous. "You think this redeems you? You're finished either way." Richard looked at him calmly. "Then let it be on my terms." Emily stepped beside her father. "It's over, James." James's jaw tightened. "You think you've won?" He turned to the board. "She's emotionally compromised. This is a stunt." But before he could finish, Noah plugged a flash drive into the projector. The screen behind them lit up. Bank transfers, offshore accounts, leaked emails. every piece of proof that James had orchestrated the scandal for his own gain. Gasps turned to shouts. James's face went pale as security guards stepped forward. "This isn't over," he barked, but his voice cracked under the weight of the evidence. As they led him away, the room erupted in chaos. Flashes, questions, breaking news headlines pinging across phones. Richard turned to Emily. For the first time in years, there was no anger in his eyes, only sorrow, and something like peace. "You did what I never could," he said softly. "You told the truth." Emily's eyes shimmered. "You did too, Dad." He nodded once, then glanced at Noah. "Take care of her," he said quietly, "and of what's left of my name." Noah extended his hand. Richard hesitated and then took it. It was more than a handshake, it was an ending and a beginning. Outside, the rain had stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds, spilling across the glass towers of the city like forgiveness. As Richard left the building, reporters shouted his name. He didn't answer. For the first time, he didn't need to. Emily and Noah watched him walk away through the lobby doors, disappearing into the crowd. She exhaled, leaning against Noah's shoulder. "It's over." Noah smiled faintly. "No, it's just beginning." Weeks later, headlines told the rest of the story. Halloran Industries reborn under Keller Foundation. Justice, redemption, and renewal, the empire that gave back. The world moved on, but the story stayed. A reminder that even the strongest walls can crumble, and that sometimes the only way to rebuild is to start with the truth.